You can have a climate-controlled house, groceries that come right to your porch, a steady job, people who love you, and still feel completely, utterly miserable. If that sounds familiar, stick with me because this video is going to explain why that happens and what to actually do about it. This is ACT Explained. Now, ACT stands for Acceptance and Commitment Therapy. And if you've never heard of it before, by the end of this video, you're going to know exactly what it is, where it came from, and whether digging into it further makes sense for you. Now, if you appreciate this kind of content, hit the like button and subscribe to this channel to learn more about ACT. Now, most of psychology treats suffering like an infection. Something foreign invaded your otherwise happy life, and your job is to cure it. Well, this is called a healthy normality. And it's this baseline understanding that to be human is to be healthy. Well, psychologist Steven Hayes completely flips this on its head. Now, in his foundational book, Acceptance and Commitment Therapy, An Experiential Approach to Behavior Change, which he co-wrote with Kurt Strassel and Kelly Wilson, Hayes lays out a concept called destructive normality. And it's this idea that your mind, working exactly the way it's built to work, is what makes you suffer. It's not broken, it's working like it's designed to. And the numbers actually back this up. In any given year, nearly 20 million people in the United States struggle with alcoholism. And almost half of the population will deal with moderate to severe suicidal thoughts at some point in their life. That's half. That's not a glitch. According to Hayes, that's the baseline human condition. So where does this capacity for suffering come from? Well, it points to something ancient. Take the story of Adam and Eve, for example. And they ate from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. Well, before they ate the fruit, they were naked and felt no shame. They just existed. But the moment they gained the ability to judge, compare, and evaluate, they lost that. Suddenly, they felt shame. They compared themselves to an ideal that they no longer met. They feared a future that hadn't even happened yet. Hayes uses this story, among others of the evolutionary perspective, to make a point about language itself. Now, the fruit represents the human ability to evaluate and judge. And that ability is exactly what allows suffering over things that aren't even happening yet, just by thinking about them. Now, that ability comes from something Hayes calls relational framing. And it's the way that humans connect ideas to each other automatically without being taught each connection directly. He uses a 17-month-old as an example in his book, and that if you teach that child that the word cat and the letters C-A-T point to an actual cat, the kid instantly knows that the animal equals the written word too, with zero direct training. That's how human language works, and it's enormously powerful, called generativity. Now, it's why we can plan, build, and solve problems no other species can touch. But it comes at a cost. We can also evaluate. We could sit alone in a quiet room and suffer purely from knowing that we're going to die someday. And no real threat in the room at all. Just the thought of one. Now, once you understand this stuff, you need somewhere to actually put it into practice. And that's why I built a free worksheet based on everything in this video. It's pulling directly from Hayes' work from ACT Made Simple that he and Russ wrote. And it's to help you to start applying ACT in your own life today. So link will be in the description below, and I'll also pin a comment. That evaluating mind runs your daily behavior through what Hayes calls rules. Now, there's three kinds of rules. The first one here is pliance. Pliance is doing something just to please an authority or someone else to avoid social punishment. So it could mean staying in a career you hate for 20 years simply because your family has equated being successful to being a lawyer. Then there's tracking. Tracking is following a rule because of its natural payoffs. So it's wearing a coat because it's cold outside. It works, so you do it again. Well, it's useful until you turn it inward, and then it starts to look ugly. So if I go to a party, then I'll panic. So you avoid the party and call it staying safe. Then the third one is augmenting. And augmenting is a rule that inflates or deflates how much something matters. So, money will fix all my problems. The more money I have, the more problems I'll solve. Here's the part that should worry you a little. Researchers ran an experiment where people were told, push this button fast to earn points. So the faster you pushed it, the more points that you got. And halfway through, the rules secretly changed. Fast pushing stopped working. Slow pushing was now the correct one. The people who had been given that verbal rule kept smashing the button anyway, ignoring the change. They were ignoring the obvious feedback right in front of them that it wasn't working. People with no rules, who just learned by trial and error, they actually started to adjust. And they adjust instantly once it stopped working. Well, Hayes used this to show how language can make you blind to reality that's staring you right in the face. This sets up what Hayes and Harris calls the fear cycle laid out in Act Made Simple. And it starts with F for fusion. I want you to picture something right now. I want you to picture something that's round and yellow, and when you slice it open, you reveal it's a lemon. And I want you to imagine biting into a sour, bright yellow wedge of a lemon. Your mouth is probably watering right now from words alone that you're hearing. Well, that's cognitive fusion. Your brain treats the symbol and the real thing as the same event. Now apply that to anxiety. You think, I'm going to have a panic attack. And your body fuses with that sentence and actually starts the panic response, even sitting safely on your couch. Next is E, evaluation. So you judge that feeling as bad or dangerous, and you have to choose how you're going to respond. Then A, avoidance. You try to run from it, you try to numb it, you try to suppress it, and that avoidance backfires hard. Try telling someone this: don't think of a white bear. If you tell them that, the only thing they're going to think about is a white bear. Because the harder you push a feeling away, the louder it gets. And that's where the R comes in. R stands for reason giving, and it's everywhere in how we talk. I couldn't ask for the promotion. I was too anxious. I didn't go to the gym. I was too depressed. And we accept those excuses instantly because we treat feelings like physical barriers, things blocking our path the same way a locked door blocks. But you can pick up a chair and move it out of your way if you need to get there. You cannot command anxiety or grief to leave your body or your central nervous system the same way. Language was built for solving problems out in the world, not for managing what's inside your own skin in your internal world. Even the word confidence gets caught in this trap. Hayes points out that confidence comes from the Latin word, which means with fidelity, meaning staying faithful to yourself. But what do we actually do? Well, we get scared before a performance or a presentation or a date that we know that something important is coming up, and we try to get rid of that fear so we can finally feel confident. Well, that's the opposite of fidelity to yourself. You're abandoning your real present experience to a fake state of mind you think you're supposed to have. You're supposed to have this elusive confidence, and it never seems to arrive right before that event. So what's the alternative to fighting your mind forever? Well, Hayes and Harris use two images that make it click instantly. First is the shovel. Now you're stuck in a hole, so you grab the only tool you have and start digging. That's what trying to control your emotions feels like. Logical. Except digging doesn't get you out of a hole, does it? It actually makes the hole deeper. You have to put the shovel down. Second image they use is the Chinese finger trap. You put your fingers in and you try to pull your fingers apart to escape its grip. But what does its grip do? It gets tighter the more you try to pull out. The only way is to push in, to lean into the discomfort, and to have that trap loosen. Hayes calls this realization something called creative hopelessness. And it's not because it's bleak and dark and that kind of hopelessness that you can't possibly change, but it's giving up the unworkable fight of controlling your internal experiences. And it's to give it up for something that might work, something that's new. And that something that's new is called ACT. And it's part of that acceptance and commitment therapy. And it's these three things that make up the word ACT: accept, choose, take action. Acceptance gets a bad rap. It isn't resignation or giving up. The word's Latin root means to receive what's offered. It means feeling your feelings as feelings and watching your thoughts as just thoughts, not as commands. Harris calls this diffusion. It's the stepping back from a thought instead of being fused with it. I want you to imagine that you have these 3D glasses. You have the red side and you have the blue side, except you have been handed only blue. And so you put those on and you're watching the movie and everybody around you is going, ooh, ah. And you're wondering, what's the big deal? Why is everybody doing that? And it isn't until after the movie that you realize everybody else had a blue and red set. You only had blue. And so you went through that whole experience only seeing blue. That's what it's like to be fused. You're only seeing through a filter of blue. You're having a blue thought like depression or anxiety or some sort of internal experience. You forget that you have that red side. And that's what diffusion does. It helps you to kind of take out those glasses and see what is going on. My mind just handed me a blue thought. And you could say, wow, I can finally see what else is there. Now here's the picture Hayes and Harris used to tie it all together. I want you to imagine that you're in a tug of war with a massive monster representing your anxiety, your depression, and your self-doubt. Between you and this monster is a bottomless pit. You pull as hard as you can to try to drag it in and destroy it. Your hands are bleeding, they're calloused, you're sweating, and you're full of just this angst of trying to win. And the more you bring it closer to that edge, the more it pulls back. You're exhausted. And the way out isn't winning this war. It's actually dropping the rope. You stop spending your life trying to control how you feel, and you start spending it on what you can do, making room for whatever you feel along the way. So here's something to sit with as we close this video. I want you to think about that one feeling that you've been spending the most time and energy to get rid of. I want you to have that clear in your mind. What have you been trying to avoid? What has been keeping you from living? And I want to ask you this question. What if the fight itself is what's keeping it alive? What if it needs you to play the game? What if you could let go? What would your hands be free to do then? What life could you build? That's ACT explained.